Yes, it is. Okay. It's an honor for me to open the first panel of this exciting conference. It will be about the challenges for journalism in the digital age. And indeed, this, I think we've heard very deep and thought-provoking remarks by Dr. Zoltán Szalai and Balázs Orbán. I will now connect to that with a few thoughts about the digital age and its impact on journalism. It's been a mixed bag of blessings. I think we can reach more people with traditional journalism than we ever had been able to before. On the other hand, the internet essentially has ruined the business model for traditional media. And then, as we have just heard, we're not alone anymore in the global village with our informations and our opinions. We have to compete with bloggers, vloggers, influencers, and every person on earth on the social media, essentially, who, just like we, want to be heard, want to be seen, and want to have an impact. So my first question to the gentleman on the stage, which I will presently introduce, will be, in this noisy new environment, what can our mission be as journalists? How is our role in society changing? And can quality journalism survive at all? And I welcome to the stage Mr. Miklós Szánthó. He is the head of the Center for Fundamental Rights. It's a think tank here in Hungary. He's also the chairman of a foundation comprising many conservative media. It's called KESMA. I welcome Matthias Zonó. He is he's a foreign desk editor of CNN Prime News that would be in Czechia. And Claude Cholet, he is the president of the Observatoire du Journalisme. It's an organization of journalists looking at journalists, I would suppose. But I would ask all of you to answer the question, but also to introduce your work a little bit.
Who is beginning? Okay, I begin because I have the mic.
Go on.
So, bonjour. My name is Claude Cholet. I come from France. And I created 9 years ago, after the presidential election between Sarkozy and Hollande won. And Hollande won with the massive support of the media, of the progressive media. So with some friends we decided to do something, not only to go home and cry because the situation was bad, but to react. And we decided, we are three of us at this time, one journalist, one guy coming from university and me coming more from business, to create an observatory of journalism whose scope is to inform you on those who inform you. Because an information is a material that has been transformed. Always. Transformed by who? By the journalist. And we publish portraits of journalists, we publish infographies on the media, and we publish daily 2 papers on the daily life of the media, and we are digital only. But we are maybe moving a little bit to be printed. So I will come back to that later. To answer the question of Boris, can quality journalism survive? I think so. Not easily, and facing numerous challenges. The main one being the competition. Now, you said that we have to face not only other media, if you are media, but bloggers, influencers. Any one of you can be a journalist. You go on the site, you go on the web, and you write something, and if you are persistent, and if you do it every day, maybe you will obtain some influence, and you will be a competitor for the media. And you may write whatever you want, either quality or bullshit. And you will find a lot of bullshit on the internet. You may know that. Okay, I will not elaborate more on that, but okay, I believe that quality journalism will survive, and it will need adaptation.
Thank you. So my name is Matyáš Zrno, so I have a nice Hungarian name, Matyáš in Hungarian, even though I have nothing to do with any Hungarian origins. But everyone in Hungary likes my name. I'm a journalist, but I'm basically switching very often my professions because I think it's good for your mental health. So I started in printing press, but then I switched to work for the government for a few years. I spent a year in Afghanistan as part of the Czech mission. I'm a reserve officer of Czech army, and now I'm working for a dying medium which is called television or news television. The CNN Prima News, which is a Czech private TV that basically bought the brand from CNN as a part of a business model that we are still figuring out if it will work or not. It's pretty new, like since last year. Now, to the basic question if quality journalism can survive, then of course I hope so, otherwise we are all doomed, because I hope that we are here all people who do the quality journalism. But of course the internet brought a tremendous challenge. Well, let's say the TV that I work for, 20 years ago TV was a #1 medium, to work in the TV that was something like, I remember one of my female relatives, she worked back in the 70s and 80s in the television as anchor, and even if she showed up in the last village, it was like the Hollywood star #1 showing up. Today, to be in the TV definitely is not of that level. And when I'm teaching at university, when I'm asking my students how many of you are watching the TV news in the evening, that used to be a tradition in most of the families, then maybe 10% of them. So it's obviously a challenge, and it's a challenge also for the print press that I used to work for. I started to work for a news weekly, some almost 20 years ago. But on the other hand, I'm not exactly sure if this brings something particularly new in principle, because you always had yellow press and serious press, and the yellow press always beat the serious, I would say, like 10-1 in terms of copies sold. I remember when I worked for the Czech news weekly called Respect, we were happy when we sold like 30,000 copies a week, and then I checked, for example, the tirage of women's magazines, and it was like 400,000, 500,000, So the same was with the yellow daily press. So basically, we are struggling. We are fighting the same war, just in a new technology environment that allows to spread information as well as informations much faster. As was repeatedly said here, everyone can be a journalist, which brings the problems because, to be frank, the traditional journalistic school, when you need to work in a bureau where you have an editor, when you have a boss, and it goes through some process, that's something that I'm missing very often among many of the new medias, because everyone thinks, I can do it straight, and nothing is that simple. So journalism as well.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really grateful to MCC that for this opportunity. I was invited here in the capacity that I'm the director of the Center for Fundamental Rights. It's a think tank, a conservative think tank dealing with constitutional and law-related issues. But truly, I'm also the chairman of the Central European Press and Media Foundation, the largest conservative Hungarian media foundation, and I always say that this foundation is the symbol of the Hungarian conservative renaissance, and it's not about some kind of a right-wing takeover in the media, but rather it symbolizes the deconstruction of the more or less still existing post-communist structures in the Hungarian media. But back to your question. I think both journalists and readers are in a very difficult position in nowadays, in the so-called digital age. Because they are presented with the fake image about the media. They are presented with an image or with a landscape in which liberal media, liberal journalists, progressives are trying to build up a narrative according to which they are neutral, they are objective. Hello, Professor. They are independent, while the other side is politically motivated. And this picture gives the readers, but both for the journalists working in media, a very fake impression, because this type of interpretation means that there is the neutral journalism covering stories both in the political world, but also it's true for tabloids, for the entertainment media, etc. That there is the neutral coverage of social issues, and all the other ones, conservatives, classical liberals, etc., are not neutral because they are politically motivated, ideologically motivated, etc. And I think this context, this narrative is highly anti-democratic, because it shows the audience, the voters, the readers, a fake image, and they misled them. Because, of course, if someone describes itself, its media, that's true for the mainstream liberal media, describes itself as neutral, as objective, and say that we are the neutral media, we are the objective journalism, then one can think that, of course, all of the other ones are, as a liberals call conservative media, fake news. And that's not true. That's not true. What is true, and I think this was echoed by Niall Ferguson here at MCC a few weeks ago, that there is an ideological Cold War again. And what is the truth is that there is, on one side, a progressive, neo-Marxist, liberal media, also ideologically motivated, following its very, let's say, values. And on the other hand, there is, of course, a conservative media with conservative journalists offering a conservative interpretation of things and social issues. But it's not about a story in which the one side, the liberal side, would be neutral and the other side would be politically motivated. The truth is that both sides are following its political values. The interesting thing, and that's my last sentence here, is that conservative journalists, conservative media outlets, for example, my foundation, openly describes itself as a conservative entity defending national freedom, state sovereignty, the Jewish-Christian tradition of Europe, etc. While the other side does not openly describe itself as liberals, as progressive. They do not say that, yes, at the mainstream media, we are liberals, we would like to build up the open society here in Europe or in the US, etc. No, they say we are neutral. And saying from the liberal side that they would be neutral, that is fake news.
All right, well, thank you for your thoughts. I welcome to the panel John O'Sullivan. You arrived just in time to be able to answer the first question, John. And you're often introduced as an advisor to Margaret Thatcher, a speechwriter, but you're a very accomplished journalist who looks back on a long career in important international media. You've always also been a political advisor of sorts. The question was, the digital age impacts traditional journalism in many ways. One is maybe good, we can reach more people. At the same time, our business model has been ruined by the internet, and we have to compete essentially with everyone who's on Facebook and the little brothers or sisters. So in that context, how does it impact our mission as journalists? How does it impact the role that we have in society? And how do you see the future of quality journalism?
Yes, it's working, thank you. Well, first of all, Boris, gentlemen, and ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for being late. Secondly, let me say that I think that has been a fairly dramatic change in journalism, which has probably been accelerated by the technical changes you're talking about. But secondly, because it's also come about because journalists have responded to those changes in a very interesting way. Now, the first of all, the changes. Well, it's created an audience, among other things, an audience of editors. I mean, if a journalist gets it wrong now, he won't just have to answer to the news desk or the foreign desk, or to a letter which the paper might not print, for example, and some papers tend not to. Then he now has to respond to the fact that there is an audience of potential editors who are experts out there. And that's been a challenge for journalists because journalists, by and large, are generalists. We're not technical experts. And when we're covering technical matters, we have to master them as best we can and then write about them. But if you have an audience of professors of engineering and you're writing about engineering, you have a very testing audience. And then now it's not just an audience, but it's a set of competitors because they can then, if they're able to, they may have their own website, they may belong to a collective of people who want to write about these questions very quickly, as for example, Dan Rather, the American journalist, found, when he vouched for the accuracy of a document suggesting that George Bush, and we're going back some years, so this has been going on some time, that George Bush II had evaded service in the Vietnam War. The document he produced was then subjected to analysis of what the font, when it was available, the print, everything demonstrated that this was a fake. Well, he hadn't picked it up, and others, but there were people out there who saw right away that this could not be true. So it's more testing thing. Now, that means that we ought to be more cautious. But in fact, it hasn't quite produced that effect. In the whole of my life in journalism, there has been a bias to the left in the journalistic community. Now, I think this probably goes well beyond my life too. But the bias was, first of all, a relatively modest one, which people could joke about. When I went from the Conservative Daily Telegraph to Irish television and radio, my new colleague, the desk editor, said to me, "Well, John, you're going to have to change one or two things here. Instead of writing about about Protestant crowds and Catholic mobs, you're now going to be writing about Protestant crowds." Catholic crowds and Protestant mobs. Now, obviously, that was a kind of a joke, but on the other hand, he demonstrated an awareness of how we should try to be more objective, or as he would have said, more objective anyway. The bias was demonstrated. The bias occurred generally because if you have everybody of the same opinion, in your immediate cohort of colleagues, and including your editors, you will tend not to notice mistakes of a certain kind. The classic one here is in the Washington Post some years ago. An article on evangelical Christians contained the line, the evangelical Christians are well known for being poor, ill-educated, and easy to lead. Now, immediately, about a dozen religious sociologists wrote to the paper to point out that, in fact, evangelical Protestants in the United States tend to be more prosperous than most other people, middle-class people. They tend to have a higher number of degrees and advanced degrees. And thirdly, they are notoriously constantly feuding and breaking away to found other evangelical Christian organizations. Now, these things were, in a sense, readily observable. But, of course, if you were a Washington Post journalist or a New York Times journalist or most urban city newsrooms in the States these days, you wouldn't have had many people among your friends who were evangelical Christians. You would have had some, but not all that many. And certainly you would be less likely to have such friends if you lived in New York, LA, Washington, and places like that. That's where bias came in, because if you didn't know much about that, you probably didn't know much about the case against abortion. It would be it's now become the case that abortion is positively a good thing, is now held almost as a religious doctrine among many people in journalism. Now, there was therefore bias, and the bias was important, but the effect of it is much worse now, because the new technologies have sorted the audience out into passionate supporters and of all kinds. So, if you're a passionate supporter of left-wing views, then you really want the New York Times and the Washington Post to take a strong line, really, beat Trump, knock him about. Whereas that wouldn't have been the case, I think, in the past. You would have wanted criticism and so on and so forth. And so as the audience has, in a sense, divided itself into passionate groups, so it's wanted its newspapers to provide it with sustenance and support and encouragement. And the result of that, or certainly the permission that fact has given, has meant that many journalists are now absolutely openly partisan, and where they once would have paid lip service, well, more than lip service, they would have taken seriously the idea of impartiality. They now reject it because it obstructs what they regard as telling people the real truth of a story. I think that kind of attitude began during the Vietnam War, but it's now spread widely to a lot of issues. So journalism is now, in a sense, a series of competing, passionate doctrines.
Well, thank you, John. And maybe one word missing from your formula is money, right? Passion is money. People Facebook, it's the business model of Facebook, but I think many newspapers have analyzed their own readership, analyzed their online traffic, and have come to the conclusion that it helps their business if they write in a more emotional, opinionated way, and that leads to more tension in society. How do the other panelists see this particular problem? Is it good? Is it bad? Can we do anything about it? Should we do anything about it?
Is that addressed to me? Okay. Oh, sorry, no. Okay. Well, I was just going to say, I think there is a lot in what you've said, but we shouldn't exaggerate that point. Here's why. Hollywood makes movies. It wants to make lots of money, and it's a difficult business to make money, but they want to make lots of money. Why do they continually make films that outrage readers and outrage viewers and don't do very well at the box office? And that's because in a community of passionate believers, you will not be praised for making a lot of money by saying things which outrage their beliefs. And I think the same is true now throughout what I'd call advanced upmarket publications, far more than in the tabloids. The tabloids, in a sense, are released from pursuing ideological follies by the fact that they desperately want to appeal to lots of readers. The tabloids do have market sense, but I think market sense now is very much attenuated in elite publications by the fact that they want to demonstrate to their dinner companions that they are, and the people in the newsroom, that they are leading the fight for a socially just world.
You were asking about the financial background and the money as well.
Well, the emotionalization of journalism, is it good, is it bad? Should we do something about it? Can we do something about it?
I think the whole postmodern is about perceptions and emotions. And humans are emotional beings. So I think if a journalist is emotional, or an article is emotional, is let's say normal or human-like. The much more problem for me, if we speak about emotions, is that the whole public discourse, the whole media has been divided or separated into two camps. And this means that I'm quite skeptic about objective or independent journalism. And it's true that instead of objectivity, most of the media coverages, and that is true for political media, but also true for the entertainment industry, is full with emotions. Because let's take the example of how the media covered the story of the BLM movement, this violent revolutionary social justice warrior movement of the BLM. One part of the media interpreted this whole story with emotions, saying that the whole issue is not about politics, that's a social justice fight, and it's a peaceful a chain of peaceful demonstrations against unjustified and structural oppression of some minority groups. And although it was still true that there were shops burned down, there were extremely violent attacks on the streets across the United States, but in Western Europe as well. There were violent crimes. They attacked statues and etc. Still, one part of the media said emotionally, because they were attached politically to the whole content of BLM, ideologically, that, oh no, that's peaceful, it's about truth, this is about somehow rebalancing historical injustice. And although most people saw, and of course there was the conservative media outlets, or at least the digital platforms, covering the bad or negative side of the story, still it seemed that one part of the media interpreted in a totally different way this whole BLM thing than the other one. That's why I say that emotions are there in journalism on both sides. And back to my previous sentences, the only problem is that one side tries to give the impression that it's not about emotion. This is neutrality, while the other side openly says that, yes, we do not agree, for example, in this Example, we do not agree with the political goals of BLM. We do not agree with the whole issue of cancel culture, of political correctness, etc.
All right. Mr. Snow?
Well, of course, we all play emotions in journalism. That's why we are not academics, for example. In journalism, you need to grab the attention of the viewer or of the reader in the first 2-3 seconds, basically. That's why, for example, a photograph in an article is so important, because people usually check first the photograph, then the title, and they start to read, and then they decide if I will continue reading till the end or not. So emotions play an important role in journalism. It's just about the balance, and obviously the border is somewhere else with yellow press and somewhere else in The Economist, for example. And it's a lot of about also the size of the media market. I mean, obviously, let's take the example of The Economist that sadly moved quite a bit to the left in the last years, but still I consider it as a useful source of information. Let's say an example of what used to be, or still in some ways, a serious media. But they have a market of, I don't know, 1 billion or 1.5 billion English-speaking people who can read it. If you're on the Czech media market or Hungarian media market, you have a market of 10 million, well, Hungarian slightly more, since you have also the Hungarian minorities around. But, we are still talking 10, 15 million people, which is very little. And the pool of the people that are willing to read something, really serious, let's say economist-like, it's much lower. So, which brings me to one point, that most probably people with some deeper interest, for example, in international politics and so on, in the future, in the countries with the smaller media market, they just need to learn English and follow the English-speaking media. So I doubt there will be enough space for serious medias in this particular field, because the media market is too small.
Because of the digital age, right? Because in former times, these media outlets were viable. They would sell the printed copy run, and they would be able to make a living. But in the internet age, they give it away for free.
Yeah, but I doubt you can get it. You can do a really quality journalism for free on internet.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean. So
yeah,
we're talking about the impact of the digital age. So this is one impact, obviously.
True.
And when we speak of bias and emotion, what's the impact of Twitter and Facebook on this? Is one impact perhaps that it has made journalistic bias more visible, because journalists expose themselves on these platforms and perhaps endanger their credibility in the eyes of the public? What's your view, Mr. Scholli?
Okay, I will address 2 points. First, Facebook, Twitter, and social networks. We have a proverb in France that we say that when you have dinner with the evil, you need to have a long spoon. For me, the Facebook and the social networks are some sort of evil. So, but as I cannot live completely without them, I must tame them, by the way, which means also to keep a certain distance. Because in the long term, I think that Facebook is supporting journalism as the rope is supporting the man that is going to be hung. Okay, this is about the social networks. Now come back to emotions. I was reading or rereading a novel by Honoré de Balzac called Les Illusions Perdues, Lost Illusions. And it's about journalism, but not nowadays. It's at the time of Restoration, between 1820 and 1840, after the fall of Napoleon and that monarchy came back. And okay, it's a bit harsh, because the book is quite pessimistic about journalism. And at this time, what was the scheme? Of course, the technicalities are quite different. At this time, media was the press, and print and press, and not only in the main towns, Paris, Lyon, and a few others. But the main appeal was emotional. Including gossiping, what we call now gossiping about people. Of course, the people at this time was not Kim Kardashian or Madonna. It was the famous Duke of so-so, or the famous count of this and that. And the split at this time was between monarchists and liberal. I will come back also to the competition of narratives. I think really now there is competition of narratives, and I appreciate what you say about mobs and crowds. But we are the crowd, huh? We are not the mob, and we are a good crowd, and we should defend ourselves. Huh?
We should defend ourselves as journalists against it. I think that's very reasonable, of course, and we should defend free speech, and we should defend all the institutions that protect it. A friend of mine once said that for journalists to be opposed to free speech or to be in favor of cancel culture was a bit like them being opposed to grammar, since we couldn't function without grammar, and if we are opposed to it, we would bring journalism and writing to a halt. Yes, I think with the big change here, which you alluded to a moment ago, Boris, is that the number of reporters is shrinking, and the number of opinion journalists is increasing, and that's because as there's a famous remark in England about virtuous journalism: comment is free, but facts are sacred, and that's been changed to comment is free, but facts are expensive. Because you have to have, it costs a lot of money to have a reporter in Washington, another in London, another in Moscow, another in Beijing, and so on. But they're the people who provide the raw material on which the rest of journalism then opines. And it's unfortunately the case, therefore, that we are dependent, two risks. One is we are dependent on a relatively few number of outlets. And in the United States, you would have to say now, the key ones are the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. I would also say one would have to add now the New York Post. The New York Post is a good reporting paper. Now, it's a tabloid, and a lot of people disapprove of tabloids. But the fact is, and I'll tell you, the fact is it's a good newspaper, and particularly a better one than many, because it actually prints news that the others wouldn't do for political reasons. And the rest of us are all dependent on that. I think there are other points, but maybe I've spoken enough.
Thank you, John. And yet again, you've touched upon the question of money, the business model. Reporters are expensive, the media have less money because social media have taken away 80% of the advertisement market. So what can media outlets do, what can journalists do to help and regain a viable business model? The two ways to go, obviously, is clicks. This is what the internet has brought us. We need clicks to have adverts, but that tends to lose credibility, to weaken the aspect of credibility. But we need credibility in order to gain online subscribers who reward that. So which way to go, clicks or credibility, Mr. Szánthó?
None. Just in order to understand my answer, just back for a moment to the role of digitalization and digital platforms. I think this whole digital internet revolution is a lie. So 20 or 30 years ago, they said that there will be this internet, the time of big media is over, information will be for free, there will be no problem for individuals to get the information they want, and there will be no so important role of the so-called big media companies. And it turned out that the very same market structures appeared on the digital market as well. Big media still exists. Now they own printed press as well, or classic media as well, and online digital media as well. When there is the Web 2.0 revolution, they said that with social media, there will be no gatekeepers. Everyone will be able to send out his or her, that's politically correct, yeah? His or their, yeah? Sorry. Opinion for the whole, or to the whole world. And it turned out that, yes, there are still gatekeepers, like Facebook, like Google, and algorithms do have, it turned out that algorithms do have ideology. Facebook, Google, and other companies can play with the news, with the content they would like to keep on the surface, and can turn down the news they dislike, the so-called politically incorrect news. So I think the market structure remained more or less the same, and the important positions remained the same. Now it's just not, most of the things are not decided in the editorial rooms of the printed press, but instead in the Silicon Valley in the United States. And this leads us to the question of financial matters and money. I think that the very answer is that woke companies and woke capitalism will finance its media. So liberal media, progressive media will survive because the content they present is in line with the ideology of woke companies. Let's take the LGBT issues, the gender issues, the BLM issues, etc. And the other side of the story, which can mean survival, or although it's quite costly, is that readers do pay for articles every and each day, not with their money, but with their data. It's a way to survive financially, but I'm not sure the best way.
Mr. Zrno, clicks, credibility, or should we just ask Google to be nice to us?
Firstly, one point to the Twitter and Facebook, because that's quite important. The trap of journalists being on social networks, it can be a good servant but a very bad master, and many journalists can fail in the trap of living in their Twitter bubble and some sort of spending incredible lot of time fighting senseless wars on Twitter. Secondly, thinking that Twitter is real life, which is not, and in many elections, journalists have been proven wrong because they expected a different outcome because they thought that Twitter is real life. So I'm very often sending to my young reporters, don't spend that much time on Twitter and go to the first village behind Prague, go to the pub, buy a beer and listen what the people are talking about. And you will be surprised, non-binary toilets are not
and then post it on Twitter.
Sorry?
And then post it on Twitter.
Like, yeah, these rednecks are talking about some strange things. Yeah, so yeah, we need to be, I think it requires a lot of self-discipline to be on social networks. Now, with the clicks or and credibility, and the big tech is of course a huge issue. I mean, you pretty much covered it, and I can't then agree. I think we need to find some sort of escape option or survival option. One of them, for example, in Czech Republic, like many conservative media, so think tank and so on, they really move to mail lists. Like we go back in the technological progress, like a technological regress, and people understand it pretty much. And many of them have really thousands and thousands of people on the mail list, and they kind of try to evade a possible trap of, in case of Facebook will shut them down, or Twitter, or Google will just move them, down in the scheme. So that might be another, because we can't beat Google. I have my doubts it's possible on national level to win the war against the big tech. It might change, maybe on the European level. I'm also not very optimistic. We will see what will happen in US. But we need to have a survival option. I'm saying when we beat the communism with samizdat, or not only samizdat, but helped a bit. We have to be capable to wage some sort of media campaigns even without the big tech. It might be wrong, but who knows? As well as we go with the regress back to the emails, one day we may get back to the print and to the paper as a sort of like new way to get informations to people. Who knows?
Mr. Scholle, you observe journalists in your organization, don't you? You follow what's going on, and after all we've said now, in the far future, would the top journalists need media outlets at all? I mean, they can become their own personal brands, have millions of followers, and on Substack, for instance, a platform called Substack.com, readers can subscribe to an individual author. He can make a lot of money, more money than he would have made at the New York Times. Is that something that the future will bring to us? Okay,
first I would like to come back on the magic recipe, click or credibility. It's like baking a cake. You need some ingredients, the two ingredients. If you put too much sugar, the cake will not be eatable. And if you don't put enough sugar, the cake will be sour. So what you need is a balance, and the balance depends on the talent of the cook. And I don't have the answer for the magic recipe. From our own side, our articles are very, very serious, but for the titles, we try to make appeal to emotion, to attract attention. Okay, I don't see that this is the magic recipe, but okay, this is our recipe. Now come back to your comments about will the bright journalist will still need a media in the long term? Possibly not. Possibly not. Huh? We see the rise of influencers. They are not they may be journalists. They may be not even be journalists. They have their own website. Usually, it's not so much on information. It's about cosmetics, about fashion, and so on. But it might be as well on information. We can imagine, yes, that a journalist can be his own media in the future and make some money with it.
John?
Well, first of all, I think that the threat to journalism is the fact that governments now see that media organizations are short of cash and do need and have difficult markets to deal with, and are now subsidizing them. I mean, this has happened in a big way in Canada, and I think it's an undesirable element because, of course, the fact that you're receiving funds from the government necessarily changes the way in which you write about the government. And I think that it's tempting for journalists to accept this, but they should try to avoid it. Now, I think that in journalism, I mean, I agree with you about headlines, by the way, but I think wit is also a very important part of headlines because they attract people to a newspaper. My own feeling is that the internet has got a lot of good things going for it from a journalistic standpoint. For example, you probably have noticed yourselves that in the last couple of years, some sites like Quillette is one, Unheard in London is another. They are offering their readers, and Substack is a third, and they are offering their readers long-form writing, sometimes a long-form serious opinion, other times long-form reporting. And there are enough readers who want that kind of thing that they seem to be able to survive by subscription. I expect that to grow. I may be wrong, and I expect it to transfer more readily than it does can do at the moment to audio-visual journalism as well, because that's getting cheaper to produce. You can have someone wandering along a battlefield now reporting in real time live on what's going on. Unless we have people doing reporting, then everything else is a form of becomes a form of literature rather than journalism. And we have to have journalism is supposed to be literature in a hurry. And therefore, we absolutely desperately, all of us, we the writers, you the readers, and I think there are potential writers, obviously, in an audience like this, many of them, you need the people to go out there and do the reporting. And now, I think my last little point here is this. People draw distinctions between objectivity, impartiality, and neutrality. I think it's very simple. Objectivity is something to aim at, but only God ever achieves it. Neutrality is how you begin. When you're looking at an event, a story, a conflict, you start out without a bias. You end up with a conclusion. The conclusion isn't a bias. If you have done the work to show that this happened and not that, then you're perfectly entitled at the end of the piece to reach a conclusion. Now, the problem is that modern journalism encourages people, particularly the criticism I was making earlier, to reach the conclusion before they know any of the facts. And that's something that we have to avoid. But that means absolutely affirming impartiality. And I think, by the way, that most regular editors on news desks do believe in impartiality. It's just that at the highest levels of journalism, highly educated editors who would never previously have done those kind of jobs now give you high-minded reasons for why impartiality should be discarded. And the rest of us should simply tell them they're talking nonsense.
Well, thank you. We have a few minutes left only before we will ask the public for questions. So, in a nutshell, the fourth power in democracy is the media, Facebook, all of us. There isn't a fourth power in democracy. Mr. Szánthó.
Good question. I would say, while not going into details about the legal aspects of division of powers, I would say that media is part of politics. So, as I tried here to express my opinion on this topic, saying that, and here maybe I a little bit disagree with it, saying that media is or can be impartial and independent. I mean, from a political point of view, it's not true. Who do deal journalists on every and each side, who do deal with political issues, they do have an opinion about those issues politically, and it's not a bad thing, politically motivated issues. And thus they are, if we take the big picture and the political landscape, then media is part of politics, and it would be a lie to say that it isn't.
You want to react, John? Go on.
Well, yes, thank
but
you.
be brief.
Yeah, very quickly. Can you? Is this? Okay, it's working. Look, I mean, we know that impartiality is something I like objectivity. We strive to arrive in it. The reason, if you're writing a story, reporting facts, you have colleagues who question you about it, who demand to know what the evidence you have is. So there are rules within journalism, within a single newspaper, to ensure that impartiality is protected. Are those rules absolutely secure? No, they're not. But the second thing is that in society as a whole, you will get other people correcting errors and biases. And thirdly, you will have, as Miklós says, what you have is papers in which journalists have an opinion. That's fine. Journalists in other papers have different opinions. The contest of opinions in the contest of papers produces some rough and ready approach to truth. And it does so because there is in you, the people who read newspapers and decide to buy them or not, you presumably have some concern for reality and truth. And if you see it being violently neglected and ignored all the time, then you're going to distrust the newspapers, which is what's now happened. Because newspapers have abandoned, as I say, at the highest levels, the values of truth and impartiality, because those have been abandoned, the readers increasingly distrust the newspapers. And that's something newspapers have got to worry about in the long run, because whether or not they have good mechanisms for survival, they cannot survive the hostility of their audience.
Just a quick answer. Okay, I maybe I'm under the impression of the Hungarian situation because I'm Hungarian, but just let you give you an example. But that's true for the EU level as well. A few years ago, they still argued, I mean the liberals and the mainstream, that there is real journalists and there are journalists serving the propaganda machine of the evil Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Now they overstepped and they say that there is journalism practiced by the so-called neutral liberal media outlets. They are the journalists. That is journalism, and the other side is just pure propaganda, and they deny the right from conservative journalists to call themselves journalists, because according to the liberal story, they are propagandists, and that's why I said that I do not see impartiality, independence, or objectivity in the media, because it's a totally clear, it's an ideological, a political war.
Thank you, Mr. Szánthó. John, we will ask the other two guests on the panel, and one is Western and one is Central European, so we can check your thesis that maybe with a Hungarian outlook it makes a difference. So first, Mr. Chollet, media, is it something, can it be a control on power, or it's an instrument of power?
It's both. But we didn't answer your question about media. Is it the fourth power that was described by Edmund Burke some centuries ago? I think now you have a fifth power, which is the GAFAM. They shape our life.
Which is what?
The GAFAM. Google, Apple,
yes.
Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. They shape my life, whether I like it or not. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to live with it. Sometimes we have to fight with it, and we have to be smart, because there are huge giants. The benefits, the profits of Facebook, it's $10 billion by trimester.
Okay, but we will have a special panel on that single question, so we will talk about it. But are journalists, are media something that can control, keep politicians honest, or are they a tool in the hands of politicians?
There has been always links between the journalists and politicians, and it's quite normal, because the politicians need support and the journalists need the information. Now we come to the point: to what extent are you embedded? I can say embedded. The journalists can be embedded with the politicians, and which needs to compromise. Okay, I know some French journalists that will say, "I will never go for dinner, for lunch with a politician. I will never accept an invitation because I want to keep my integrity." This is a minority.
Okay, 2 minutes, Mr. Renaud.
Sure. Well, this might really differ country to country, but what I can see from Czech perspective, I see a steadily decline of influence of journalism. Like 15 years ago, our prime minister was forced to resign because the main Czech daily brought an information that he can't explain, like maybe 100,000 euros investment in his new apartment. This will probably be not the case anymore. I mean, the power of these big dailies or the news TVs are gone. The question is if this is from some objective reasons, and I agree with John that there is a lot of media bias on the side of the mainstream media. I have a full PowerPoint presentation about about the failures of mainstream media. They very often tend to talk about disinformation webs and disinformation campaigns from Russia and so on. But the thing is that they do a lot of they bring a lot of misinformations and disinformations themselves, and this is bringing the trust of the people to quite a low. To be frank, if you rank jobs in Czech Republic in the public opinion, what is the most trusted jobs and the less trusted job, then sadly journalists are somewhere where the cleaning lady is at the very bottom of the list. So that's something most probably, especially for the journalists, to think about if it's not their fault.
Thank you, and we have come to the end of our time. Now, I'm not sure everyone paid attention when Kokuglila said in the beginning we have a system where you can send in questions on the Slido system. I don't know how it works, but I know that if I see something here, I will then say what the question is, and we will wait a few seconds if perhaps anyone comes up with a question. There is no question here until now, but until now, let me entertain with, yes, please, Anna-Elisabeth.
Okay, I don't know whether I need a mic or just shout. There's a mic. Thank you. My question is actually to go a little bit more in social media, on the role of social media, because I see social media as a free-for-all, and some of it you just disdain. But I was shocked during the American presidential campaign last year when Twitter suspended the account of the New York Post, which I sometimes write for, and I agree with John that it's a great reporting paper, because they were actually doing their job, reporting on Hunter Biden's, the son of Joe Biden, dealings in Ukraine. And the question is there a possibility of considering that social media have now become utilities, just like people who provide water or gas, and to regulate them as utilities, not in questions of opinion, but with the framework of looking at them as providers of essential services?
All right, would anyone like to react to that?
Well, I do think there is a case for doing a couple of things. The obvious one is to say that if they're going to be treated as a common carrier, like the post office, then they should, you can either do that, or you can treat them as publishers, in which case they become eligible to be sued for errors of fact. What would be the regulation you would impose? I think it would be the first, in the United States, it would be the First Amendment. You have to, your editing, publishing standards have to conform to the First Amendment and can't display favoritism or, what do they call it, content, concern with content. So I would favor that if it's at all possible. I'm told there are all kinds of legal problems, but it seems common sense. Either you're a publisher, or you're a utility, and if you're a utility, you have to keep to the First Amendment.
There is a project at the European Union called DSA, Digital Services Act. Well, and it's two sides. One is to regulate, but the other side is also to fight against hate speeches. And you can imagine what can be an hate speech. So it's, on one way it's control, on another way it's more censorship. So I am quite reluctant on the European Union project.
And Lila, I cannot read your telephone anymore. It has asked me to enter a code, but never mind. So there is one question here saying, does anyone remember when Facebook closed the account of the New York Post or Twitter? I can't remember, because of a true report on Hunter Biden. Would anyone like to react to that question? Maybe John, you're the person.
Well, I mean, that was the point referred to by Anna-Elisabeth, and I think it is a key point. The idea that a story that is obviously relevant to the election, because it reflected badly on Joe Biden, not as a father particularly, or maybe that, but as somebody who seemed to be complicit in what were corrupt dealings. Now, was that true? Was it false? Well, I would say that there were what they call prima facie grounds for being interested in it, and it was illegitimate of the big tech companies to actually prevent the New York Post story breaking out of the readership of New York. It was scandalous, actually, and that was and I think they were acting as a conspiracy against the public good. But when conspirators against the public good are sufficiently powerful, they tend not to be held to account.
Thank you, John. And I think we will call it quits with these last remarks. Thank you very much for the conversation, and I can't wait for the next panel.